Hello, and welcome to a discussion about mixing dialogue with music, particularly focused on post, although some of these tips could be applicable in mixing vocals and music. Today we're going to focus on a few tips that concentrate on what makes dialogue intelligible, and the point of this exercise is to see if we can make space in the frequency spectrum for the dialogue to sit within the music so we don't have to do a bunch of unnatural volume rides. There'll still be some volume rides, but you can do a much more natural job with full-sounding music if you take and use some of these tips and put them into practice in your studio. The first thing we're going to look at is Neutron 2 by Isotope. And this is sidechained by the dialogue bus. And that sidechain is only affecting the dynamic EQ that is set on nodes 3, 5, and 7. You'll note that 2, 4, and 6 have a little dip at each of those same frequencies, but that's to make it more natural when the music dips for the dialogue when it's present. You'll see that in an example. The second method is using some MidSide EQ and getting some separation that way. So the bottom and the top frequencies are boosted a little bit on the sides only, and the formant regions are dipped in the center only. A little more significant dip, but it makes some space in the center where the dialogue really lives. And you'll see that example. This is also sidechained from the dialogue bus, but that's only so I could see the frequencies that are really popping out from the dialogue, as FabFilter ProQ 2 allows you to view just the sidechain or all of it, any combination of these, within its spectrogram. Finally, we're trying some sidechained multiband compression. FabFilter also makes ProMB. And for this, again, we have a little boost on the top and the bottom. And then the mid frequencies, especially focusing on the formant regions, are being triggered by the sidechain from the dialogue bus. So let's dive in and see what happens. For this first example, we're going to be using Isotope's Neutron 2, which is currently bypassed. So you can hear first just the dialogue track.
I'm using the cast of Babe's torso that I made when I first met her to make the final prosthetic.
And next, just the music track. So I am using Neutron on the music, but it's being sidechained from the dialogue bus. And we're going to focus on the equalizer section. What you'll notice first is that I have a little shelf at the bottom to give it a little boost, and a little shelf at the top to give it a little sizzle up top. And then I've used the even nodes 2, 4, and 6 to give just a little bit of dip at 500 hertz, 1750 hertz, and 3500 hertz. In addition, I've added nodes 3, 5, and 7 at those same frequencies, but with much larger dips, except these odd nodes are only being used in dynamic mode, and they're only feeding off of the sidechain dialogue bus, and only, again, if there is information present in that frequency range. So if there's nothing happening here at 3500 hertz, this dynamic mode EQ will be doing nothing, and we'll just be left with that little dip. So here's what that looks like with all of that engaged.
I'm using the cast of Babe's torso that I made when I first met her to make the final prosthetic.
You probably noted that those nodes were moving dynamically and changing the level of dip as the dialogue was present. Now, it sounds fine without Neutron in.
I'm using the cast of Babe's torso that I made when I first met her.
But it's kind of lifeless. With this EQ pulling out the frequencies that might interfere with intelligibility, and then compensating with a little boost at the bottom and at the top, It's a much more full sound that interleaves, mixes better with the dialogue, and still leaves room for the dialogue to breathe and be understood. Again, here that is.
I'm using the cast of Babe's torso that I made when I first met her to make the final prosthetic.
I hope that made sense. Now we're going to take a look at a few other methods using some different plugins. For this next example, I'm using FabFilter's ProQ 2, and I'm doing something a little bit different. So I'm taking a few of the bands, putting a low shelf and a high shelf to give a little boost at the bottom and a sizzle at the top, but those are only, if you notice, going to the side. The center frequencies, which I'm dipping at 500, 1750, and 3500 hertz, I'm dipping at a significant amount of 5 decibels, but they're only dipping in the mid. You'll notice that. So the ProQ2 allows you the ability to specify which frequencies are being pulled or boosted in which channels. So here's what this sounds like with ProQ2 bypassed.
I'm using the cast of Babe's torso that I made when I first met her to make the final prosthetic.
And now I'm going to play it to you with the EQ engaged. You'll notice that the dialogue sits in the music a little more without me having to do any volume rides at all.
I'm using the cast of Babe's torso that I made when I first met her to make the final prosthetic.
I hope you heard the difference that makes, and now we're going to move on to our third and final method. So I'm going to be using the same dialogue and music examples, but today we're going to use a different plugin. This one is also from FabFilter, but it's called the ProMB. It's a multiband compressor, and you'll probably notice already that it is being sidechained from the dialogue bus. So whatever's coming off of here is going into the sidechain. And to keep this discussion consistent with the previous two examples, I am giving a little boost to the top and the bottom, you'll see, and I'm dipping in the same frequency ranges as before. And what you'll notice is that those dips are being affected by the sidechain, external, there and there. But the boosts at the top and the bottom are not being affected by the sidechain. So with the ProMB disabled, here's what that sounds like.
I'm using the cast of Babe's torso that I made when I first met her to make the final prosthetic.
And now if I enable ProMB, you'll notice that the dialogue and music sit together a little more without competing for the same space, and both are allowed to breathe.
I'm using the cast of Babe's torso that I made when I first met her to make the final prosthetic.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our discussion on mixing dialogue and music in post. Download trial versions of these three plugins: Isotope's Neutron 2, FabFilter's ProQ 2, and ProMB, and see what they can do for you. There are many techniques and many plugins that can help you achieve a proper dialogue music blend. But check these three out. You won't regret it.